So we're just extending a very warm welcome to you all, feministas, to this 11th PhEminar in the series. This is the third wave of our PhEminar activities. And yeah, it's just to kind of remind you who we are and what we're doing. We are an ever-growing network of feminist scholars, activists, artists, and what we're trying to do is to mobilize theory into praxis, to make some sort of worldly difference. And so working to make theory useful actually and political, and to make a tangible difference is really what unites us. But we are a very diverse group, and yeah, the feminars have been online because of the pandemic, and they've actually worked really well. There is an element of interactivity, but we're really hopeful that at some point very soon we'll all be in the same space time, and sharing not just our work and our ideas, but actually hanging out together. That would be wonderful. But until that time, welcome to the 11th PhEminar in our series. I'm going to hand over to Jessica now, who we just noticed when you look at her name, Jessica Ringrose, caring is right in the middle. Isn't that awesome? So I
Great.
will hand over to Professor Caring, to provide an introduction to our speaker, our feminista for today.
Great from Materialist observation, Jane. I'm so delighted to welcome Dr. Evelyn Geertz to this seminar. I've been a big fan of Evelyn's. I think she does exactly what PhEmaterialism aims to do. She takes really complex theoretical frameworks, and I've always been so impressed with how accessible and usable and practical she makes them, especially the work she's done with Karen Barad's concepts. And I find myself often going to your encyclopedic entries, Evelyn, to see how you have made it so useful and interesting and accessible and usable. And that's exactly the type of feminist philosophy that we like to see and do in our happenings as we work in this FemMaterialist trajectory. So I'm going to pass to Evelyn, who's talking about eruptions and memorials and more than humanness, and using critical new materialist research encounters and lessons to look at this topic. So I'm going to pass over now and looking forward to this very much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I just also put a link to the slides, a PDF of the slides in the chat, and Jane has already posted the Padlet link. So let me just share my screen. Can you all see it? Okay, cool. I'm just going to quickly put the chat a bit higher. Okay, great. Let's get started. First of all, of course, thank you for that wonderful introduction again, Jessica, Professor Caring. I really like that. And special thanks to all of the organizers of this thought-provoking series, actually, for having me. The series itself actually has been a great way to stay connected with other critical pedagogues and theorists throughout these hectic, isolating, and completely disorienting crisis times that do not seem to be ending anytime soon, unfortunately. So I'm really happy to be here today. Just going to make sure that I can switch my slides. Yeah. I have planned a lot for today, obviously, as I usually do, but there will be a healthy mix and balance between philosophy and critical pedagogy, I hope. So in today's PhEminar, which will be split up in 2 segments with a nice little digital break in between, we will be delving deeper into what I call critical new materialist explorations of the affect-laden, more than human Memorial 22-3, located in Belgium's Sonian forest and constructed to honor the 32 victims that died during the Brussels terrorist attacks on the 22nd of March of 2016, which is exactly 6 years ago. This particular part of the project is framed by a larger study that pushes for an alternative post-philosophical theorizing of terrorism and counterterrorism, basically as intertwined material, discursive, affective phenomena, and a project that thinks through the more than human materializations of political violence, memory, and memorials and commemoration practices. If you are interested in reading more about this post-philosophical reconceptualization process, then be sure to keep an eye out for updates on our Urban Terrorism in Europe blog. I've added a link here to the left to said project. There will be another conference announcement coming up shortly. And yeah, I've also added my contact details on Linktree so that you can contact me if needed. What are we going to do today? After quite lengthy introduction, which basically forms the core, I guess, of this whole PhEminar, in which I'm setting the philosophical, or in this case, post-philosophical scenery, and touch upon 3 principles that characterize my work, zoom in on 3 materially rooted methodologies that are also crucial to the PhEmaterialisms community, and lastly, explore the constellations of a digital critical cartography of critical new materialist thinking. I touch upon, as Jessica already said it, the interlinked phenomena of eruptions and disorientation. As will be argued, both phenomena contain a lot of reorienting, re-energizing potential that could be of use when doing research in these tricky times of multi-species crisis. Times that, at least for me, have also been packed with plenty of research failures. What are failures anyways? Particular barriers and less than normal productivity levels. And how do I hate that notion, that neoliberal notion of productivity, but anyways. Space and time are then made for our first Padlet activity. And I've added a QR code that'll direct you to set Padlet space as well, but you also have the link now. I will then end by addressing the More Than Human Memorial 22.3, also talk a bit about various research challenges to then really finalize the whole PhEminar by delving into another more Baradian kind of activity on remembering processes. So that's about it, I guess, for the overview. 3 important notes. If we go to the Padlet space for a second, and I'm just going to do that, you'll see that there are 5 activity boxes. The 2 boxes on the right are actually boxes that you can make use of during the whole PhEminar. So there's a concept cloud and a reading materials one. If you're, for instance, if you feel the need to, add extra articles, then you can do that under reading materials. I think it's always a good way to get some extra references there that we can then use together later on. And when it comes to the concept cloud activity box, if you, for instance, thinking through the notion of eruptions and you want to connect it to, I don't know, existential crisis modes or something, then this is the place to do so. And of course, feel free to comment on each other's comments as well. So this is your space, really take advantage of that. Another note, let's see. If you have any urgent, philosophical content related questions, then feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try and kind of check out the chat while I'm doing the PhEminar presentation thing, and I'll work them in if I can. If not, I'll do it after the break. And thirdly, and this is the most important comment, I guess, I really set up this PhEminar to not only tell you a little bit more about the multidisciplinary post-philosophical projects that I'm involved in, I also really want to try and pique your interest in all things new materialist methodological and offer you a set of tools that then can be applied in a theoretical or an art praxis related or pedagogical way of your own liking. So I'm basically just trying to, I guess, share my enthusiasm, my nerdy enthusiasm with all of you. I'm going to try and break after about 35 minutes, just so you know. So that being said, let's delve right in because we have a lot of stuff to do. First, something more about my own situated positionality as a multidisciplinary philosopher who's doing post-philosophy, which for me is an umbrella term for all contemporary strands of thought that are post-structuralist in nature, and I can come back to that later if you want to. This positionality sketch really matters to me, as all critical cartographies have to have a disclosable map maker and did a starting point to not become totalizing, as Donna Haraway also taught us. So having been trained as a political philosopher and critical theorist in the US and on the continent, I've explored fields as diverse as sexual difference philosophy, feminist science studies, queer theory, memory studies, all fields that seem to be all over the place, basically, but actually share a Harawayan preference for epistemological electroshock therapy, as she also calls it in Situated Knowledges. These fields as electrifying frameworks, or deconstructive frameworks, offer excellent tools to rethink the production of knowledge and the problematic onto-epistemological legitimization processes that go along with it, while also assisting with the deconstruction, the much needed deconstruction, of the still all too traditional exclusivist and all too human discipline of Western philosophy. And it is this penchant for the deconstructive and the critical epistemological that drives all of my thinking doings. And it cannot and should not be separated from the ethical political. As to echo Haraway's words, this time from Staying with the Trouble, it matters which stories tell stories, which concepts think concepts. The implications then of how phenomena, acts, and events are conceptualized and what ethical political connotations these conceptualizations might carry has also been really well highlighted in Judith Butler's work on processes of framing and on the differential mattering of embodied beings. Think of Bodies That Matter, and their latest work on the effects of the war on terrorism, basically. And the latter, the differential mattering of bodies and not mattering of bodies, is of course a crucial theme in contemporary critical new materialist thought, as will be explained in more detail shortly. For now, the following definition, I guess, is okay to use. So critical new materialist philosophies, for me, are a strand of post-philosophical thought that focuses on how a gendered, racialized, sexualized, etc., capitalist logic of productivity and reproductivity steers these mattering and non-mattering processes. Think of Melinda Cooper's work, Rosie Braidotti's critical post-humanist work as well, of course, Chakravarti and Da Silva's comments on racialized capitalism, which is really crucial for me, and of course, Karen Barat's Knowing and Being. Especially the latter, agential realist idea, explored in Barat's Meeting the Universe Halfway, expresses the sentiment that theorizing always already takes place within the world, and that there is thus a relational engagement between the material, the conceptual, and the environmental that should not be ignored or denied or, washed away, basically. Let me read the following quote from Meeting the Universe Halfway to make that a little bit more clear. So Barat there states, practices of knowing and being are mutually implicated. We don't obtain knowledge by standing outside the world. We know because we are of the world. What we need then is something like an ethico-onto-epistemology, an appreciation of the intertwining of ethics, knowing, and being, since each interaction matters, since the possibilities for what the world may become call out in the pause that precedes each breath before a moment comes into being and the world is remade again, because the becoming of the world is a deeply ethical matter. Sounds quite Butlerian in a way as well. So thought itself as a material and materialist activity, together with its practitioners, should be carefully attuned to these worldly connections that surpass the rigidly drawn, but also always quite porous boundaries between the human, non-human, dehumanized, and the more than human. And I always try to think these four categories together in my own work. Thought, a thinking from within and with the world, which stands in sharp contrast to Hegelian armchair philosophizing, and I do have a meme about that somewhere, but I'll leave it at that. Thought, seen through such an agential realist perspective, is thus never innocent. All these principles are, funnily enough, also central to the PhEmaterialisms network, where the emphasis is really put on creating responsive and responsible research that is embedded in the world something that my colleague Delphi Gustas and I have also written extensively about. Now, these three scene setters, these three principles, the critical epistemological, and attentiveness to framing and mattering and non-mattering, and knowing and being, not only reveal the situatedness of the researcher and the research project, but they also point at their limitations, such as the fact that critical cartographies in the nomadic tradition of Deleuze and Guattari, but also of Braidati, for instance, cannot encompass every point of view. And this actually neatly brings me to the three materialist and actually new materialist methodologies that play a crucial role in my work and that I want to sketch out in what follows, as to provide you all with a toolbox to theorize from within the world. So let's go there. Donna Haraway, of course. So the first concept and methodology is probably quite well known to all of you, situated knowledges. Writing about her quest for more socially just scientific knowledge praxis and multi-species living, Haraway states the following, and this is still my all-time favorite passage from Situated Knowledges, so I'm gonna read it out loud. Haraway says, feminists don't need a doctrine of objectivity that promises transcendence. No Hegelian theorizing. We need the power of modern critical theories of how meanings and bodies get made, not in order to deny meanings and bodies, but in order to build meanings and bodies that have a chance for life. Again, processes of mattering and non-mattering, as you can see. Rooted in feminist standpoint theory, science studies, and Marxist materialism, such as Situated Knowledge's project emphasizes the fact that the material body and the environment of the researcher influence the knowledge that is being produced and vice versa. And you can clearly see where Barad got their knowing and being idea from, basically. Haraway moves towards a theory and praxis of situated knowledges while never fully letting go of the philosophical theory of realism, or the idea that there is an independently existing reality out there that we can observe and produce knowledge about, which makes sense. I mean, Haraway has been trained as a biologist. So Haraway's project is not relativistic at all. And this is really important to accentuate in these crazy post-truth times. As a biologist and a feminist theorist, Haraway is actually looking for a more nuanced option, the middle ground between the hyper-stereotyped radical constructionists who supposedly believe that truth and knowledge claims are fully dependent on power relations and rhetoric, and then the extreme empiricists on the other side who supposedly believe in completely neutral and untainted scientific knowledge production. Haraway wants something more nuanced, critical, realist materialism, basically. What Haraway wishes to point at with this project is that each and every perspective is forever contextual, partial, and incomplete, and that seeing and thinking from nowhere, a totalizing doctrine or Hegelian philosophizing, is but a dangerous illusion. We need a multitude of situated perspectives if we are to arrive at a deeper understanding of our complex, multifold reality. Moreover, every vantage and entry point into the production of canonical knowledge is also about the question of the power to see. Vision, as Haraway, inspired by Foucault here, teaches us, is never innocent, as it alas often is accompanied by violence that instrumentalizes and objectifies. The latter has become clear in the centuries-old praxis of map-making. Together with travel writing and narratives of exploration, cartography was part of and contributed to Western imperialism and colonialism. Especially since modernity, maps have been used as representational explorative tools and consequently have often misrepresented the world to glorify certain colonial powers and divide the world among them. Representing the world through the visual geographical concept of space, maps literally map out land and territories, as well as the specific resources, peoples, and other important features of these territories. The process of delineating that is inherent in mapping has a controlling function. To map, mark, and delineate space means controlling and owning it theoretically, onto-epistemologically, and politically speaking. This is precisely what situated knowledge production reveals. Maps are always power-laden, and if a map maker is pretending to speak from a universalist top-down position, Hegel's position, I really don't like Hegel, sorry, you better beware. And this attentiveness to imperialist power relations and imbalances is why the discipline of critical geography came into being during the heydays of post-structuralism as well, which was all about recognizing the Foucauldian intertwinement of le savoir-pouvoir, power and knowledge. Rather than conceiving maps as flat representational objects, untouched by either power relations or social political reality, critical geographers such as John Bryan Harley and Dennis Cosgrove conceptualized maps as forms of power knowledge, used by modern states to legitimize their colonial conquests and the construction of empires and the onto-epistemologies that went along with that. Or what decolonial feminist philosopher Sylvia Wynter has so poetically described and criticized as the processual dehumanizing praxis of the coloniality of being / power / truth / freedom through the mapping notions of man one and man two, or the rational political conquering European subject and the economic self-proclaimed racially superior European subject. Precisely these ideas of onto-epistemological knowledge production and world making through maps and via the disciplines of not just anthropology, but also really, philosophy, my own discipline, have also rightfully been criticized by philosophers Enrique Dussel and Walter Mignolo. The concrete spaces in which knowledge has come into being are constructed and potentially marginalized matter tremendously, as do maps, canons, theoretical traditions, and the materializations of that which Dussel and Mignolo refer to as the geopolitics of knowledge. Because of its geopolitical, onto-epistemological character and its emphasis on the politics of location, critical cartographical methodology cannot but be self-critical towards the arrogant, self-proclaimed epistemic political dominance and consequently the violence of the West. Seen through all these critical perspectives combined, meant to unsettle and deconstruct, map makers and counter map makers specifically are not only invested in designing maps to show the world as is, but are equally invested in larger power charged projects of what I call ethico-onto-epistemological world making. Maps do not simply reflect the world as is, or what those in charge of these visualizations think it is, but also demonstrate specific ways of looking at the world. In more Deleuze-Guattarian and Brydodian, but also Baradian essential realist terms, maps are ethico-onto-epistemological relational cartographies that spring from a constantly unfolding world. Before going there and really delving deeper into critical cartographies as a methodology that you can use, I need to, first of all, very briefly focus on the rhizomatic. So together with situated knowledges and various critical geographical principles, critical cartography is also really underpinned by Deleuze-Guattarian rhizomatic thinking. Deleuze and Guattari's conceptualization of the tree and the rhizome in the introduction to 1,000 Plateaus is of interest to us here. Working towards a more relational way of thinking that has no fixed, and I quote, points or positions, the symbol of the tree firmly anchored by its roots and central stem is a symbol of structure, fixity, and a particular binary logic of representationalism. And do keep that notion and critique of representationalism in mind, because you will need it during one of the activities. So because of the tree's orderly vertical shape, the world, according to such a tree logic, is divided into binary structures with the world as such on the one hand and representationalist symbols or signifiers on the other. For Deleuze and Guattari, and I quote, tree logic is a logic of tracing and and reproduction that is hierarchical in nature as tree roots grow vertically. They describe this representationalist, reproductive, arborescent thinking as follows in 1,000 Plateaus, and I'm not going to bore you with the whole quote, but what is important to get here is that they basically say that the tree and root inspire a sad image of thought. In contrast, the rhizome stands for a more open, non-hierarchical, non-phalangocentric logic, as rhizomatous plants have root systems that are completely entangled with one another and possess nodes that enable the horizontal growth of even more roots. The rhizome is, and I cite them again, altogether different, a map and not a tracing. It is entirely oriented towards an experimentation in contact with the real and has multiple entryways. And it's that latter element that will become really important. So rhizomatic thought basically is not confined within a fixating structure, but rather embodies nomadism, relationality, creativity, and unpredictable growth, all PhEmaterialist principles, I think, and therefore can be seen as the driving force behind critical cartographical mapping, although it is also, a perfectly good metaphor and methodology that stands perfectly on its own, of course. And this is also illustrated by a lot of present-day work being done by post-qualitative thinkers. Now, that's a really nice GIF here. I'll explain to what that refers to in a second. So the continental nomadic philosopher Rosi Braidotti, and also critical post-humanist, of course, labels critical cartography, and this is our third methodology, as, and I quote her here, a theoretically based and politically informed reading of the present that presents us with both analytic and exegetical tools for critical thought and also creative theoretical alternatives. Braidotti's critical cartography is not a transcendental regulative theory a la Kant or Hegel. Again, it is a form of colorful map making with deeply entrenched roots in the material world, therefore packed with the potential to present a geopolitical, power-focused thinking with the phenomena of which it is sketching the contours. It is here where critical cartography reveals itself as anchored in Deleuze's Guattarian rhizomatic non-essentializing thinking, Foucault's power knowledge notion, Haraway's multi-perspectival situated knowledges, and of course also Adrian Rich's corporal politics of location. For Braidotti, maps are inherently knowledge-laden and power-heavy as they depend on the map maker's viewpoint. Thus, what is important to remember here is that there are no innocent, pure maps out there, no God tricks allowed, basically, when mapping. The advantage of working with such a situated critical cartographical methodology is that it is characterized by an openness to the future and other perspectives infused cartographies on the same or a different topic. If we were to make things a bit more concrete, and that's always really difficult when you're doing philosophy, but still, and we were to try to summarize the characteristics of critical cartography as a new materialisms embedded methodology, then the following points would pop up. So firstly, critical cartography builds on Foucauldian archaeological and genealogical methods as it touches upon finding the conditions of why something has come into existence. Think of Trumpian post-truth politics or something like that, while focusing on how knowledge production and power relations are always entangled. But it also goes way beyond that. Critical cartography demands more from us as knowledge producers than merely creating a history of the present through genealogies. There also needs to be a certain openness towards the future to not paralyze the object of interest, an event, a concept, a theory, as well as a clear, accountable, responsible engagement with the map maker's own geopolitical situatedness. Secondly, the critical cartographer is then supposed to reflect upon their own geopolitical situatedness and also give an account of where they are coming from, disciplinarily, but also geopolitically speaking. Thirdly, the critical cartography is a lively assemblage, always in the process of unfolding itself and moving, as you can see on the image to the left. Fourthly, through the lens of a cartographical method, power relations are never seen as merely limiting, but are also conceptualized as potentially empowering and generative. This is the Deleuze-Guattarian element popping up. And a fifth and final aspect of the practice of critical cartography is that it remains open-ended. As Braidotti also writes in Nomadic Subjects again, cartographies mutate and change, going with the flow while staying grounded. Critical cartographies follow the movements of forever shifting constellations of the spaces, archives, texts, concepts, and even philosophical traditions that are examined through such a lens, meaning that these spaces, archives, and so forth are regarded as, and also respected as, having agential power. So it's basically a non-stifling, non-tree-like methodology. Now, before I move to the interlude in our first activity of the evening, I wanted to very briefly show how I applied this critical cartographical approach to new materialist philosophy itself. I can always talk more about how I put this project together and like how I came up with the data in order to basically design this huge map, digital map. But this digital cartography basically offers a situated sketch of new materialist philosophy as a methodology, a zeitgeist-adjusted conceptual toolbox, and an ethico-political stand. So perfect to analyze these more than human crisis times with. Enlighten myself here a little bit. Why? Because new materialisms, and especially those critical variants that have been influenced by feminist, queer, and critical race studies perspectives, as a de-anthropocentrizing post-structuralist paradigm, basically directs its attention to the intricate micro and macro webs of bio-necro power, which humans, non-humans, the more than human, and those deemed less than human are all shaped by. So it's really about those mattering and non-mattering processes, as I've repeated throughout this seminar already. Further exploring this map will also tell you that new materialist thought is all about the embodiment and embedment of material beings, how these come to matter and often also not matter. And new materialist post-philosophies furthermore consist of various streams that do differ from each other quite a lot, depending on how invested they are in analyzing power relations, as the more simplified map actually shows us here. So as you can see, the more critical new materialist streams of thinking have been positioned on the right, whereas the OOO and other frameworks have been put on the left. And it are the critical new materialisms in particular, so Haraway's ecofeminism, Alaimo's ecofeminism, Jasper Puar's assemblage thinking, Mel White-Chen's animacy theory, that present an ethical, political, or put in more Baradian terms, ethical, political, onto-epistemological stand as they sketch and tackle the effects of power on micro and macro levels. I'm going to leave it at that. I'll just quickly go to the website so that you can have an idea of what it looks like. And if you have the PDF, you can basically also click on it. So it's really an explorative kind of like mapping. And you can type in names and things like that. Like, well, I'm not going to do it, but you can click on all the notes and kind of, explore this wonderful but diverse strand of thought through the map itself. So I am going to leave it at that for critical cartography. Why this focus on maps and methodologies and critical cartographies? Well, because these help us as human subjects to orientate ourselves and quite literally so find our ways, right? And these pandemic / imperialist war-ridden / neo-fascist post-truth, and you can keep going on and on, crisis times are basically demonstrating the fact that we, part of all sorts of assemblages, have lost our way and ways, especially so seen from a more holistic, critical new materialist point of view that comprises the ecological, economic, and social political. Complex crises such as the one and that category for me includes colonies of cult Danish minks, part of the world's forest already burned down by the extractive capitalist machine, and the oceans whose surfaces are having to make space for massive volumes of polluting face masks. Well, the crisis times that we are currently living in are not just disorientating because they disorientate and take away some of the actual places, but also imaginary places we could go through the usage of maps and other tools. These multi-species crises also make us plunge into the unknown, forcing us to refamiliarize ourselves with the known, the supposed normal, now dubbed the new normal, but actually not so new normal, and the taken for granted. As they make us aware of our tendencies to navigate time and space without too much self-reflection. And queer theorist Sarah Ahmed has put it so wonderfully in their book, Queer Phenomenology from 2006. Ahmed there says that moments of disorientation are vital. They are bodily experiences that throw the world up or throw the body from its ground. Disorientation as a body feeling can be really unsettling. At the same time, though, these traumatic moments of disorientation force us to reflect upon where we are going, meaning this orientation also opens up the possibility of reorientation. And the same thing can be said about the equally double-layered phenomenon of eruptions. An eruption, from the Latin eruptio, erumpere, meaning a sudden bursting in, often with military connotations, stops us in our tracks, forcing us to pause and reflect upon the path we were walking down. Yet eruptions do not just demobilize and immobilize us. They also tend to make space-time for something new as they queer the perceived linear progression of time. This double-layeredness becomes clear when looking at a conceptual genealogy, not cartography, of eruptions. So I basically scrambled some philosophical oeuvres together and was quite surprised to see that a lot of thinkers have actually already reflected upon the notion of eruption. Proto-existentialist philosophers Martin Heidegger and Emmanuel Levinas, for instance, used the notion to respectively point at the revealing of Daseins, or the embedded subject's authenticity vis-a-vis other beings. And then in the Levinasian case, the feeling that falls over us when we come face-to-face, face-à-face, with the wholly vulnerable other. In these instances, we are halted in our tracks, but there's also a certain energy in the air, I guess, to, for instance, choose to respond to the call of the other. And this is actually also where the philosophical roots of the Haraway-Barredian notion of responsibility comes from. It really comes and stems from Levinas. The Deleuze-Guattarian take on eruptions has a similar affirmation-based focus. The notion pops up in a couple of times in their oeuvre, specifically in the French original books, because eruption is, a term that's more used in French, actually. And it really pops up a couple of times in Anti-Oedipus, where it is brought in relation to their schizoanalysis-based critique of Lacanian psychoanalysis and Lacan's faulty understanding of desire as lack. So Anti-Oedipus, in the end, is all about desire and revolution, and is driven by the question of where the revolution will come from and in what form. It asks, where will the new eruption of desire come from? The answer is that the new eruption of desire always comes from within desire itself. So deducing from that, what erupts bears the potential for change in itself. And this fits really well with post-qualitative thinker Mirka Koro-Ljungberg, who sees eruptions as energy-filled moments of potential reorientation and basically employs it as a very specific, again, materialist methodology, as we will see in our first activity. This was a lot already, so my suggestion would be that we have a nice 10-minute break first, and then we're going to come back and we'll delve straight into activity number 1, and I'll basically explain what you're supposed to be doing. Let's start again. My cat was running around like crazy just a second ago. So the plan for now is to actually use the Zoom breakout room function and divide you all up into groups of 4 or 5. And what we will be doing now is making use of the Padlet space. I don't think it needs a lot of introduction. I've basically added and I'll just go to the Padlet space, might be a bit easier. So I basically added the instructions to the activity box already. And there's also a short fragment from Koro-Ljungberg, who uses eruptions as their methodology in the post-qualitative work that they do. So read the instructions, I would say, and think through the questions that I have formulated. And then feel free to answer them in any way possible, discuss them amongst yourselves, take pictures. You can be super creative if you want to. I'm gonna, make a lot of space for this. So let's say that we come back in 15 minutes from now, and then we'll do a short recap of the exercise. Does that sound okay for everyone? Cool. I'll just set up the breakout room, if I can find it. I think we're kind of all back, I hope. Is there anyone that would like to do a short recap on more people are coming in, obviously?
I'm not sure we are all back. We were
No.
26 and now we're 13.
I thought people had run away, which, sometimes happens. Okay, let's wait. If there's anyone interested in maybe briefly sharing what they discussed or just, yeah, if they have a remark or anything like that, then feel free to do so. Oh, there's something in the chat.
We talked eruption, disruption, eruptions, and playing around with those words and what that does. Talked about eruption as coming from within. Disruption can come from outside. Eruption is something that's quite violent. So just playing around with those words.
Anyone else that cares to share? If not, you're still welcome to, of course, write down your comments to the Padlet, right? I'm going to continue because I don't want to take too much time away from the PhEmaterialisms networking moment. So let me share my screen again. I wanted to mute myself again, but that's not what I should be doing. I'm going to keep it rather short. So far, we basically did a lot already, right? We discussed some post-philosophical self-situating principles, critical new materialisms as a specific power-focused project, 3 major new materialist methodologies, situated knowledges, rhizomes, and critical cartographies, and also made some time to reflect upon eruptions and disorientation as well, space-time disrupting methodologies that could also take us somewhere else, that could help us reimagine, reality, basically. We still have one more activity ahead of us, and I do want to end with that. But before going there, I do want to sketch the contours of that Memorial 22.3 project that I'm currently working on. And I guess all of the research challenges and, quite frankly, failures, moments of pandemic unproductivity, and eruptions that I've personally encountered along the way. And I hope that kind of gets you going to talk about, your own quote unquote failures, which I guess we do focus on in academia, but not in that affirmative way. So as said earlier, I am focusing on the more than human Memorial 22.3, meaning that I'm analyzing this memorial site as a lively, more than human assemblage with, again, material, discursive, affective layers, and that through a combination of critical new materialist thinking, critical post-humanist theories, field philosophy, which is very much an application of Freudian knowing and being, as these weird, nerdy philosophers go to specific research sites to do situated and not lofty abstract theorizing, which is a challenge, and of course, various post-qualitative inquiries and approaches. A special place in this project is reserved for post-philosophical reflections vis-a-vis the discipline of memory studies and the phenomena of memory, remembering, memorials, and commemoration processes, trauma, and silences, or that what is so haunting and so eerie that it basically escapes the conceptual. It erupts, as Alison was also referring to, right? So Derridian, Deleuzian, and Baradian approaches versus memory, remembering, and commemoration are all combined in this project. So if you're interested in this, think of Derrida's Memoirs of the Blind, and of course, Spectres of Marx, where memories and archives are read as tiny traces, and the hauntological that traverses past, present, and future makes an appearance. Think of Deleuze's difference and repetition that can be read as conceptualizing memories as politics-infused micromaterials. And of course, Barad's Meeting the Universe Halfway, but also their later, more Derridian work, in which memories and remembering are seen as worldly embedded tracings, as we will see in our final activity. Now, as said earlier, this particular memorial site in Brussels was constructed to honor the 32 victims that died during the 2016 attacks, perpetrators not included, which already tells us a bit more about, again, mattering and non-mattering processes, and how commemoration-based memorials often also have, I guess, a political significance and function. Other more traditional commemorative memorials have been created since 2016 as well, and you can see one in the middle. So there's been this mural by Benoit van Innes, which was constructed in the Maalbeek Metro, where part of the terror attack happened. And then this Flamme de l'Espoir, so the Flame of Hope by artist Mustafa Zufri, which is a beautifully designed monument that rarely received any media attention, probably because of its location in the stigmatized Brussels municipality of Sint-Jans-Molenbeek, where some of the perpetrators were actually from. Again, mattering and non-mattering processes, right? Now, what makes this memorial so fascinating, in contrast to, let's say, the foregoing more traditional monuments and grassroots memorials, is precisely its non-urban location, the fact that it consists of simple birch trees and Belgian bluestone blocks. And I'm just gonna already go so you can see a panorama picture at the bottom here. Simple birch trees and Belgian bluestone blocks, which are usually used for gravestones, and the non-attention drawing manner in which it has been built. And then I have to go back to the slides, as you can see basically on these set of pictures. Now, for the post-qualitative nerds among us who love experimenting with creative post-qual methodologies, these 4 pictures on the right are basically agential snapshots driven by pre-programmed intervals, which means that there is a lot of prepping time involved before even going to the field as this weird philosopher doing field research, which in a way is also ironic, as this working with agential snapshots and the little narrative clip tool that I used is supposed to be framed by an emergent methodology, one that actually focuses on eruptions and sudden movements, yet setting up the narrative clip apparatus actually takes a lot of rational planning and time. In addition to this, attuning oneself to this lively apparatus or mini camera requires a lot of training, which is why my pictures actually came out upside down and completely distorted the first couple of times, speaking of research failures. Then again, these failed snapshots also have a power of their own, I think. Let me go back to this last slide. So here you can really see the Memorial 22-3. It really simply exists within the natural landscape. And exactly because of its inconspicuousness and environmental embeddedness, most passersby do not seem to engage with the monument at all unless they've developed some kind of personal relationship to it. So there is a small sign in Flemish and French and English when you come closer to the monument, but it is actually in a huge forest. I mean, it's one of the biggest forests, I think, in Europe still, not sure, Eastern Europe at least, but it's really easy to miss. It's like a super, super tiny sign. And this resulted in skaters actually using the monument to skate on. As you can see, skate marks all over the blue stone blocks, as you can see on the picture on the left here. Also clashes with the rather nationalistic collective Belgium Remembers narrative, a narrative that in a weird way always focuses more on the perpetrators and political questions of identity and perceived attacks on, in this case, a supposed shared Belgian identity, whatever that may be. Nobody knows. Now, I want to end my talk here and give you the floor again. I'm not going to delve too deep into all of these research challenges. Let me just focus on one of them so that we still have time to gather and talk things through again. So I personally find it quite interesting to keep reflecting upon what goes wrong, quote unquote, in my research and where my research, but also personal limits, I guess, lie when theorizing things. It asks, again, the failures, the non-outcomes, things that do not end up materializing as planned, as was the case with those narrative clip pictures, for instance, and snapshots. These frustrating experiences actually propel us out of the contemporary neoliberal academic space and context, which, as you know, revolves around an educational banking system in which extraction and regurgitation are central praxes. And this brings me to the question of representationalism again. So remember, we talked about Deleuze-Guattarian rhizomatic thinking and their critique of a tree-based logics and representationalism. Well, working with political violence and specifically trauma-causing events has constantly made me hit the walls of conceptual intellectual representationalism and philosophy as an intellectual but also materially rooted project. How can we, as researchers, adequately and responsibly represent and work with events that are so gruesome that they exceed our conceptual and actually also intellectual and sense-making frameworks? How do we work with the nonsensical, the hauntological again, the eerie? And how can we do justice to the lived experiences of the folks involved and actually the assemblage of material beings involved? Don't we always sort of fail when trying to capture even the smallest snippets of these affect-laden lived experiences? And what does that tell us about doing philosophical and academic research at large? This is more of a rhetorical question. Like, I don't have any answers yet, and I don't think I'll ever have the answers, which means that I am gonna divide you up into smaller teams again to talk about the last couple of questions. We're of course running out of time, so I would say, just pick one of the questions on the second activity box. And there's a really nice fragment by Barad, well, actually two, on remembering and memory that you could definitely analyze and then talk about. And we'll see each other again in, well, let's say 10 minutes this time, because we need to kind of wrap up. Okay? Okay, I'm gonna divide you in Zoom breakout rooms.
Yeah, let's, is anyone interested in sharing what they were discussing? Even if it was a bit off topic or went back to the eruptions question. I would like to do that for a minute or so and then basically wrap up everything. Anyone? Bless you.
Thank you. I was like, I can say something, but I'm going to sneeze first. So I've sneezed. Now I'll share. We ended up with the question of what is our true nature anyway. So you can, that's where we ended up. And so we'll just leave it there.
Very essentialist.
Yeah.
Well, I think in our group, we were basically talking about eruptions again and about how in academic spaces, it's kind of, it takes a lot of vulnerability to also talk about your failures, but they can be as equally as productive. I don't know if I've summarized that correctly, AJ?
Yeah.
I think we're all brain dead a bit by now also. Could that be the case? Shall I just wrap it up? I really would love for all of you to really, use that Padlet like it's yours. Feel free to, add some random associative like concepts to it, some hyperlinked articles. I think that would be really good to do so. And what I'll do is I'll keep the space open for like a week or so. And then afterwards I'll turn it into a PDF, and then maybe it can be distributed together with the recordings so that other folks can also kind of use it. I actually wanted to end with a very apocalyptic kind of like thing, because why not? But no, I actually wanted to well, first of all, tell you that there's also a references slide. So for the philosophy nerds among us, you can go there. But I actually wanted to end with a critical cartographical warning, something that I was also thinking about, I guess, during the two activities. And I guess it also summarizes the core of all of the mentioned new materialist methodologies quite well. So the multi-species crisis landscapes and times that we're currently inhabiting and experiencing are truly so disorienting, I think, that we could easily be tempted by, the philosophical desire to create all-encompassing and often, very reductive, totalizing grand theories and narratives and solutions. And this trying to seek refuge and non-situated method centrism or methodolocentrism, however you want to put it, is exactly what should be avoided. No God tricks allowed, right? Not even in what looks like the possible end of the Anthropocene. And on that cheerful note, I'm going to open up the floor for the informal networking event that follows now. And I again want to thank all of the PhEmaterialists and of course all of you participants. And I hope that, you had an interesting time at least. Great, thank you so much.